great infrastructure, communications. Perhaps you can go into some of those other areas where...
Those are among the many reasons, and the connectivity which relates to the port and the airport I think is a very, very important one. Miami has 1,192 flights a week to Latin America and the Caribbean. And again, that's just Miami. That's without the additional complement of Fort Lauderdale Airport, of, frankly, the rest of the airports across the state that complement this gateway status that we have in Miami. But you have no different support effort in Orlando and in Jacksonville and Tampa. You know, Florida is one of those states, few states in the country that have a number of business centers. And again, this complements Miami's activity. In addition to that, we are the second largest international banking center in the United States, second to New York. I think that complements and supports an institution of this magnitude that we're asking to be considered housing here. The other reason why I think it's really, really important, we have the largest Latin American and Caribbean consular corps in the entire country, actually the entire region.
Are there more than like 60 consulates located here in Miami?
That's correct. But with regards to specifically Latin America and the Caribbean, everybody but two countries have a consular office here. And as you know, consuls set up office in places where you have a community,
where you have an economic and social
to support.
Right.
So that is really the best reaffirmation we could show with regards to this microcosm argument that we make that Miami is truly a representative of every one of these nations. You know, we have a Haitian circuit court judge in our community, a Haitian-born circuit court judge. We have a Haitian-born mayor in our community. We have a Colombian, for the first time in the history of the country, a Colombian-born state representative, and it goes on. I mean, so these are folks who are in positions of leadership, elected leadership in our community, and they're of all these various parts of the hemisphere.
And for many Latin Americans, they refer to Miami as their second home. Many of the public officials and many of the business leaders throughout the region have either an office and or perhaps a home in the city of Miami. So how do you think that the chance that the permanent secretariat goes to a different city would affect Miami?
Well, I believe it's important to highlight that because we have all these ingredients and make us truly the undisputable gateway of the Americas, you can't argue why others would want to become that gateway as well. I mean, it's understandable that any city in the world has a right to want to become whatever it wants to become. And we've seen that happen across our country, and that's how cities earn their international status. So we've had a number of U.S. cities already apply to also be considered. Probably the one that strikes the most interest is Atlanta. And I think, like I said, every city has every right to want to become whatever it wants to become. I think we're a mature city as it relates to Latin America and the Caribbean.
We will continue this conversation with Mr. Jorge Arrisurieta after this break.
There is really only one boy. One girl. One tree. One forest. One deep dancing ocean. One mountain calling. One handful of sand through our fingers. One endless sky overhead. And one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
Hi, I'm Whitney Belker, and welcome back to Miami's Global Connection. Mr. Arrisurieta, we were covering the selection process for the permanent secretariat for the FTAA. Can you tell us a little bit more about why the selection process is so important?
Well, this is going to be a decision that will be made by the 34 ministers who are negotiating this agreement for their respective countries. No different than they're currently deciding issues with regards to agriculture, intellectual property, and the many other issues within this agreement. It's not going to be decided by a vote. There's no election day where they're going to sit down and pull a lever and vote for one country or another. They are negotiating this, and they're going to arrive at a decision through a process of consensus.
Okay.
This process of consensus takes a while to arrive at, but the idea is that there be no winners and no losers, but that unanimously everybody agrees with hopefully Miami being selected as a city.
Where are we in this process? I know that Uruguay confirmed their support. I saw some information about you and the president of Uruguay and him confirming the support of Uruguay for Miami. Where are the rest of the countries?
Well, CARICOM, which is an organization of Caribbean nations, has united their effort behind their favorite son, if you will, Trinidad and Tobago, which is a country obviously that's competing against us in this effort. Uruguay is the first nation that comes forward and endorsed Miami, and we hope to have other announcements real soon after this ministerial meeting. So we're making progress.
Which countries can we expect to hear an announcement from?
You'll hear them real soon. We're not at liberty to discuss other than to tell you that I think there's going to be lots of nations that naturally are expected to do this more so than others, and some are negotiating bilateral agreements with the United States, and there's a prudent period of time whereby you've got to expect these nations to deal with this only because they've got to have these agreements ratified by the Congress. So we believe that once we get that step out of the way, hopefully we're going to be able to announce some of their supports.
All right, so I understand there are other cities who are trying to win the permanent secretariat. We've heard of Atlanta as a forerunner, Panama City, Pueblo, and then you mentioned a couple of other U.S. cities have popped up.
Now, this process began in Miami and moved to Panama City and is now in Puebla, Mexico, which is the interim site of the interim secretariat. Those three cities are, of course, interested in being considered, and so is Trinidad. The other cities are Atlanta, and just in the last couple of days, we saw three other U.S. cities join the effort, and that is Colorado Springs, Chicago, and Houston. This is an open process. The only requirement, technically, to be able to submit your interest in being considered is that you are a city in any of these 34 countries. And the United States Trade Reps Office sent a notice to every single city around our country, formally letting them know that if they were interested in competing, they could just do so by sending this formal notice of intent or a formal notice of being considered by November 20th. So on Friday morning, the last day of the ministerial meeting taking place in Miami, we'll know who's really in this for good.
And what does this really ultimately come down to? Is it a financial matter in terms of how much money the cities can raise to support their lobbying efforts, perhaps? I know Atlanta was raising money. I understand that Miami just secured, was it $12 million of funding, a combination of private funding and government support?
Yeah, the monies that were raised by our community here in South Florida, by our efforts statewide actually, was really money for this ministerial meeting that's taking place in November, in the next couple of days. That money was, most of that money was federal funding, $8.5 million to be exact, which is being secured for security for the meeting. And almost $2 million of that was from the private sector. And that was mostly for the ministerial meeting, but we've done just fine in raising the monies we need for the campaign to land the permanent secretariat, and there will be more announcements on that front as well.
And why do you think the private sector has agreed to put money into these efforts?
Well, I mean, you heard me say earlier in the show that Florida is the largest trading partner with every single one of these nations. So large companies, small companies, mid-sized companies do business with the 33 nations of the Western Hemisphere. We are mutually dependent. 47% of what we export as a country is purchased by Latin America and the Caribbean.
I believe we have a graphic of the Latin American regional headquarters and the number of companies that are based here in Miami. A number of these companies are based in Miami for a reason, including American Airlines, American Express, we've got Chevron, we've got Club Med, Disney. Why HBO? Microsoft, Motorola, all of these companies have selected Miami as their Latin American headquarters.
Well, again, I believe that that's not by accident. These companies have headquartered their Latin American Caribbean operations in this community, in this part of the state, really because of our access, our connectivity.